We'll quickly move on to our next panel for the day. When things don't go according to plan. I'm sure in our work, that is an absolute Murphy's Law. But do we talk about it enough? Let's look at some of the data that we have. Drawing a parallel from the VC sector, an estimated 75% of US venture-backed startups fail. Sources have quoted that about 90% of Indian startups fail within the first 5 years. Bill Gates has argued that the hit rate in the development funding is better than the success rate in venture capital funding. Yet we have celebrated stories from other spaces of failures where people actually learn from it, draw insights, and are able to use it to their advantage to get better at things. Prohibiting failure kills innovation is something that we firmly believe in. Yet successful stories of failures from our sector don't surface quite often. The next panel is our attempt to change that. May I please invite my colleague Sonali to introduce the panel and kickstart the discussions.
Good morning, everyone, and I'm really lucky to actually moderate this fabulous panel, which says when things don't go according to plan, and actually it's not going according to plan. My panelists have all disappeared, so I hope I spot them soon. The reason being they have all taken a quick pit stop, and I think the panel topic has made them a wee bit nervous. So I thought I'll quickly share that what failure and things not going according to plan mean to me. So whenever things have not worked out, I like to sort of have that experience in private. It's been extremely difficult to share that and be open because of the nature of how then I'm judged. But I thankfully don't have to tell you more about my story, but I have my absolutely fabulous panel with me now. So as such, we really had a little bit of a discussion before we came here, and one thing we really discussed and decided, and taking from Arvind's morning welcome address, is that there is a deep need to be vulnerable if we want to have an honest conversation. So before we jump into that honest conversation, I'd love to introduce my panelists here who have been really gracious and accepting to be on this panel. There's Rishikesh on my extreme right from Azim G Philanthropic Initiative. If I can describe Rishikesh, he's made a shift from Microsoft to the development sector, and for him, the big word is impact. And he has been trying to figure out programmatic impact, and I think we all understand today's even the theme for the day is really understanding impact in our social sector. So welcome, Rishikesh. Of course, Poonam needs no introduction, our firebrand colleague whose fabulous episode, Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hoon, has really taken television by storm. Welcome, Poonam. She heads Population Foundation of India. Several accolades to her credit, so really look forward to hearing more from you, Poonam. Matthew, who's really scaled up amazingly Magic Bus. Few know about his corporate career before that. Formerly, he really was the operating officer of Cox & Kings, founder of cleartrip.com. But I think what he really brings today is his heart and experience to having scaled up program for disadvantaged youth to really talk about livelihood and education for them. So thank you, Matthew, for being with us. And on my left is Aparajita, an old friend from University, JNU. So we have a lot of skeletons in the cupboard that we share. Won't talk about it here. But welcome, a powerhouse to be reckoned with, Executive Director of Center for Catalyzing Change. Welcome, Aparajita. Huge amount of experience in working with women and girls, working with the government, not so easy ever. So really look forward to having a conversation. So before we begin the day, there is a voting mechanism that we are all using to solicit opinion from the floor. And the first question that we are going to throw up for all of you to let us know what you think about this question. When we fail, do most people cover it externally because you fear of losing funding? Yes or no? Well, so we have the answer from the floor that yes, when we fail, we really fear of sharing that experience because we fear losing funding. So this segues beautifully into the first question that I had for my panelists, that often we do really, as a community, believe that we can learn from failure and that we should share our failure, but we hesitate to do that, and there are a lot of systemic issues that prevent us from doing that. And as I open this question up to my co-panelists, I just want to throw an idea to all of us, that the whole startup world has brought a new understanding of what failure means. If you have 10 tries and 10 experiments, only one succeeds. So inherently, to succeed, you have to fail. But that's something that we don't see or feel comfortable with. So talking failure. So can I start with Aparajita on my left?
So I'm going to start off your panel, Shonali, with a disclaimer and kind of place the conversation by asking the question, when you talk of nonprofits, because I think today we are particularly talking of nonprofits and failures, how much scope is there to actually fail big? Are we setting ourselves to fail big? I think no. Because if you look at the process that takes place when a nonprofit is designing a program and a donor is actually giving funds, the donor, before they make their country strategies or thematic strategies, they will do roundtables, they'll do strategic reviews, they'll decide what works, they'll look at evidence, they'll choose NGO partners, they'll do due diligence of the NGO partners, they'll come and do audits, which is all good, they'll talk to donors, they'll talk to board members. Sometimes I feel that they're going to come home next to test the dust on my shelves at home, you know. So they do a very hardcore due diligence. And then when it comes, it's our turn to design the program, and we are called into the field to bat. We don't aim for 4s, we want to hit a 6. So we do our due diligence. We look at what is working, what is not working. We prepare a log frame. We look at, what is our capacities, what do we need to do. So we are more and more being really, really constricted to being very diligent, being very clear about what we want to do, being very evidence-based. So I think, in a way, that is also making us a little bit more, quote-unquote, safer. So my opening statement here is that I think we are losing space to fail big. We may fail incrementally, like, we may have delays. We may have, instead of aiming, let's say we aimed for 20% change, we might end up at 15 or 12%. But something really, really not working at all is difficult to come by.
So I think, Aparajita, what you're saying is not about just sharing failure, it's just disallowing failure. So Rishi, can I turn to you with really how, as a foundation, are we really, are you or others and thinking about so much of safeguarding against even disallowing failure? So where then is the chance to share and learn?
It's us also. The nonprofits also disallowing failure, not just us.
Thank you, Shonali. I must say I was looking with some trepidation at that score, and when I saw 21%, I thought, okay, now we can hope that we are on the side of the 21% and not the 79. But the truth is, as Aparajita said, this is a tricky issue. Very specific context from the funders' side is that I guess, in all humility, we have enough share of blame. I do sense we can come across as very success-focused, We consider ourselves custodians of a generous family's well-intentioned money, so we are very, very focused on success. To Aparajita's point on failing big, our perspective is to try to encourage failing small and failing fast. So, and within our institution, we have systems set up for rapid prototyping, Horizon 3 thinking. It's no surprise that 75% of startups fail. It shouldn't be a surprise that a lot of development sector projects fail, because while startups get murdered by competition, we get murdered by complexity of the kind of work we do for solving malnutrition, for instance, or empowering adolescent girls. These are incredibly complex social systems, and failure is inevitable. I guess our response would be that we should plan to fail quickly and learn as much as we can from the process. Learn whether it was the idea that was bad or the implementation that was bad, and use that before we really scale out larger investments.
So I think you said something really interesting, murdered by complexity. So I now want to turn to Poonam with that notion that given that social change is so complex, often you will not get signals of failure, success very quickly. And therefore, it does take time. And then how would you respond to really the investment that is required to both learn and share in our sector?
So many of the projects that we are talking about start as pilots. And I believe that if you don't have a design for scaling up, you are protecting yourself from failure already. Okay? You're not confident, you're not doing your planning for the pilot to scale up. You can often, the complexity is external too. The environment changes. Are you looking at the environment? The laws change, the rules change, the funding environment changes, people around you change, staff change. So the external environment in an organization as well as internal environment could change. But to get early signals, I don't think the donor will get the early signals if you're protecting yourself. So what are the social norms? Are you in the pursuit of truth? And are you in the pursuit of really making a significant change and scaling up your work? If you have this as a project that you're only going to do the pilot and do a complex unevaluated pilot which you will declare success, or you could, because so much money, so much input is going, which would be a failure if you scale it up. The second part is the donors. So it is the NGOs, and in terms of the donors, the problem is that there is an issue of donor, a program. I've been a donor, so I see my colleagues. We are program officers for 4 years, 6 years. We are not looking at really often whether that program will succeed. It'll be after our time. So what I want to sum up by saying is we need a culture of change where constant, not just due diligence before, diligence all throughout. Evaluation is important, monitoring is also important, and what other parameters our success should be judged in? Is it scalable model? Do we have the courage to do a real external evaluation? So we need to change the culture, which is not easy to do, but we really need to talk about that.
In fact, Poonam, you've really given me the question for Matthew. I mean, Magic Bus has scaled up spectacularly. And I think just thinking about probably the lessons and the mine of information that you're sitting on, how comfortable has it been sharing that and actually being open about things you have learned that can be so useful to many who are in this pathway of scaling? Because this is the mantra that in a country where we want 1 billion to thrive, you can't think small anymore. So big is beautiful. So Matthew.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think I'm agreeing with what you're saying as well. And I think the paradox for me, when we went through very significant change between 2015 and 17, and I'll perhaps talk about that later in the conversation, but was that in many ways we were admitting quite large challenges, failures in the organization to our external stakeholders and talking them through that. And the paradox was that I think they were probably more supportive about the challenges and being part of that journey with us, and therefore were supporting us more. You know, I guess I've had the privilege of sitting on both sides of the fence as you have. There's nobody in the corporate world that can achieve what you guys do for the money you have. And I think genuinely, if they're wise, good partners, they see that. You know, who operates a company on 20% admin fee? So I think for me, that was a really big learning to say, look, you know, let's just take them on it. And if they say no, they say no. But we are being honest to ourselves. I think without failure, you won't grow. And we've, you know, I think Magic Bus, you know, if we hadn't made some of the significant failures that we had done in those days, we would not be, you know, a multinational charity as we are now and grown in the way we had. And there are still lots of challenges. It's definitely not sort of an easy road at the moment either. But responding to what you're saying about externally, that sort of internally rather about the wheels of change, and I think it's critical that we, and I'm a founder, I've left the organization, we have a CEO now, but it's critical that we retain this thing called founder's mentality. And this is not about me or any other founder, but it's about the mentality in an organization to be insurgent all the time and not be not go into incumbency. And that's what happens with scale so often, is you go into process, you go into systems, all very, very necessary, but we lose the battle on the front line. And we start losing innovation. We start going into safe zones as an organization because we know that works. And I think, for me, that cultural challenge in, you know, we have 2,000 staff or so now at Magic Bus, and that, for me, is probably what I work on most of the time with the organization now, is how do we keep that ability to keep saying, it doesn't matter if you fail. Let's be honest about that. Let's make it quick, but let's also create that culture of change.
I think this is a good point to think about internal culture within an organization. So one is actually the programmatic piece. So we have a question for the floor, the second question. Do you have internal structured systems to break down and learn from failure without casting blame? So how do we react to failure internally? So the floor is really equal. Some have a system and some don't. Let's see, because what you experience externally is also sometimes reflected internally, that if any of our colleagues fail or things don't go or someone's design didn't work, we are very unforgiving. And what does that mean as colleagues, as peers? To allow people to experiment. So I think this is really, really a critical question. I'd like to begin with Rishikesh this time. If you can tell us that internally at APPI, what is the culture?
Yeah, I would love to answer that. But before that, I must say that we are guilty of not translating that culture well enough to our partners. So I will speak a bit about the culture, and I hope we did more. About being able to translate that. But a couple of things I'd love to talk about. Every work plan that we design has something called Horizon 3 thinking, which means that Horizon 1 is the stuff that you think you're good at, you need to keep doing, get the trains moving on time to deliver your commitments for the organization. But Horizon 2 and 3 is really about piloting and then rapid prototyping. So a significant share of the time of every individual is spent in this Horizon 3. Things that we need to try now and learn for the future. So we have actually, and over there, the success is measured in trying and not in terms of success or failure. So Horizon 3 thinking is one aspect of it. We're starting to do some things to take this out to our partners as well, in terms of can we do very rapid pilots, build some data systems to try a new idea and then see what the data is telling us before we actually scale that out. So Horizon 3 thinking is one. using data as, for decision making as a mental model and how that applies to all our programs is the second one, so that we're rapidly analyzing data. I realize data gets bucketed along with M&E and impact and RCTs and goes into a different direction, but here we're actually talking about real-time data that's coming from programs that we work on or our partners work on. And so two things I would say we're doing is the Horizon 3 and data as a model for decision making.
So Poonam, if you can take the mic, I love new words, Horizon 3, so I think everybody will be talking about Horizon 3 very soon. We'll be talking about Horizon 3 very soon, you know, we love our jargon. So just Poonam, thinking about, you know, to humanize it. It's not just about systems process, it's about people as well. So if someone, it's my promotion, it's my next job, yeah, failure doesn't come that easy. So Poonam, just reflect on that a little bit, the human factor.
So, you know, failure, acknowledging failure doesn't come easy is true statement, but it's relative too. For instance, I was thinking, as you were asking me the question, you know, a divorce was seen as a total failure of a marriage some 50 years ago, 30 years ago. But today, many of us, a large percentage of people see it as a solution too. While earlier, so social norms are changing or attitudes are changing. Within, how do you deal with failure? First of all, I want to say three things. Whenever I have talked about failure, it has given me strength, it has given the organization strength, and donors who we maligned by putting 70% is because of the donors, have always been very supportive. Recently, I was at the Gates Foundation, I will name them, and I said, one project isn't going well. So they said, we respect you, we expect you to write and tell us that, but tell us what will you use that money for? And as MacArthur Foundation, when I was heading that, I thought I was this NGO culture. I came as an activist, and after 2 years, I evaluated the work of MacArthur Foundation in India because I had some extra money left. And MacArthur Foundation was horrified that I'd got an external evaluation of our work in India. And the office was only 2 years old then. And I was told by my boss, who's a very fiery woman, you cannot share this report with anyone. Of course, I went and shared it with the vice president of MacArthur Foundation. It's always helped me sharing the truth. People appreciate it. So let's try that risk, and let's maybe do a few case studies on and documentation of what works. And personally, I learned this personally when I saw failure and I talked about it and I didn't feel scared of failure. It's given me a lot of courage. So I'm going to really say to my brethren, and I and Aparajita have performed before, talked about the failures, the very private failures in our organization. And people really appreciated it. We didn't feel targeted or insulted. So let's create a culture, and let's talk more about that. How do we create a culture of acknowledging failures, learning from failures? By the way, in our program, especially Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu Design, we learned more from bad programs, and we also learned from what worked globally, and that's our success, learning from what doesn't work.
So I think since Aparajita has been named out, so I think I'll turn to you, Aparajita. In your journey of, you know, leading SEDPA, founding an organization, dealing with so much in terms of just looking at things not sometimes working out with colleagues can be frustrating. So let's know what's your story here.
So I think I agree with Poonam that it's really, really important for us to recognize that failure is a big learning for us all. I think we are fooling ourselves if we don't really look at failure in the face. And I think in our organization, we have, it started slow, but it has become very frequent now that we look back. We have team meetings, we have project team meetings, we have senior management meetings, where we say, okay, let's look at, we had made a plan, why are we not there? And I think as senior management, it's really important that you do not right away blame and shame people. I think we can hold people accountable, but it's wrong to kind of make someone a scapegoat and say it's because you didn't do your job. I think that's a wrong practice that we must avoid. But taking a step back, I think for nonprofits, failures are of two kinds. One is sheer programmatic failure. So when, if, for example, you're designing a program for women around domestic violence, and if your program actually ends up the husband perpetuating more violence on the woman because you didn't get some of your strategies in place, I think that's the biggest fear of failure for us, and that is what so far we haven't faced. And that is where most of our energies go, that when you are doing an intervention in a community, have you looked at everything that is working around and not just the girl or the woman you are interacting with? I think that's a failure that we haven't faced, and we hope that we never faced. The second failure is really internally. Are you getting to your objectives? Are you getting to your goals? And I think the fact that we have very stringent monitoring frameworks really help us pivot very, very quickly. So in a month, in a quarter, we know that this strategy may work. This is working 50%. This is not working at all. So in a quarter, in a month, you are kind of doing course correction. Yeah. And I think it's really, really important because at the end of the day, the non-profits, we are holding ourselves to the people, accountable to the people that we serve, plus the people who's given us the money to do that job. Sure. And I think it's a failure if you do not have these monitoring and evaluation systems.
So coming to you, Matthew, before we open the house, open the floor to Q&As from the folks in the room, just to say that at Magic Buzz and in your experience, when you bring in the human element into the question of failure, colleagues and others, how has that fared at Magic Buzz? Do you think that despite being well-intentioned, sometimes people just don't get it?
So I think, so I'll just draw back to a very significant period in our lives, which was in 2015. As a founder, I'd exited the organization in India to start Magic Bus in other countries, so we had a new leadership team, and we were growing very rapidly, and the numbers looked really good actually. So we're all quite happy about that. But then things started going horribly wrong at the organization, and I think just drawing on the conversations we're all having here on stage, in retrospect, and the cliche always about culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think is what they say, isn't it? But it is absolutely true, unless you have strong value systems embedded in your organization, then you can't have a culture of change in your organization, a culture of failure. And I think what we were very driven by was scale and obviously the benefits of bringing out more impact, of course, was there, but I think we got sucked into the numbers perhaps more than the actual quality of what we were doing. And so we had to literally break down the whole organization. And so, we ended up changing the leadership team. We ended up moving from a very central founder-led structure. And those of you who are founders will know this, is you tend to sit on a throne. And when you put your first CEO, and then I speak to many of you here, it's often a very difficult task for that guy or lady to come in. And it didn't work well for us. And so you realize that you can't have a central hierarchical organization. So you then go out into a flatter, matrixed organization probably. And you start connecting people at the bottom, of your workforce with the top very quickly. Because I think, it's a really interesting thing when you do this thing called an NPS score, which is basically a net promoter score with your employees. And you work out what they think. It's a very telling tale of where you are as an organization and your ability to fail. And so we had an appalling NPS, which is now good NPS, but because we've done lots of things to improve that. But I think, we had to act very quickly and create systems and structures that would enable us to, and because I know you want me to move on, but just really what was probably one of the most significant things for us as an organization in this culture of failure was to be honest to our mission and our vision and have the ability to go to some of our funders. We had I don't know, Aaron is our funding, we had about 80 funders, I think, when this was all going on, 100 funders, to go to them and say, we can do this, we can't do this. because it's so tempting when people are, especially in this day of CSR and people, it's very exciting, new revenues coming in, we're jumping at a lot of things at the moment. And, and I think, it's very easy to get mission drift when you start doing things that you shouldn't really be doing, because there's so much pressure on us at the moment to perform as our funders want us to perform in this new environment, and to say, no, we'll do this. And we were happy to walk away from some of those partnerships, but it's been much richer for it, internally and externally.
So really, I mean, it's been such an intense panel for all of us, I think, considering that we all play such a stretch role. So I'm opening the floor now for questions, and I'm sure there must be many. Not sure we have all the answers, but I think this has been a very thought-provoking bunch of people. So yes, so can we have a few short? I'll take a couple of questions, and then the panel can. So we have two hands right up here.
Yeah, I'm Arun. I'm Arun here. I'm very closely connected with Magic Bus. So I have a question. I was listening to this panel. I spent 35 years in corporate before stepping to the social sector. I'm with Magic Bus now for 5 years. And one of the things I came to a conclusion is that a social sector, we are in a very complex business. And the word business is important. And we work with very frugal resources, and we're trying and solve very complex business. So one of the things is why failures is not embarrassed by, it's not as a part of our culture in the social sector. I think is also because we always are on a reactive lens. Harikesh was just telling we're not able to nip them in the bud. And we're also very conscious that we will lose funding. So one of the questions is that, is it time has come now to, sort of saying, since CSR is a very important bucket for the social sector, is the time come now for all of us to sit and say, we need to really, create an ecosystem, like a VC ecosystem, and say, we need to educate our funders to say, there is going to be failures, and you've got to be a part and parcel when you're making a decision to say you need to factor that risk in, and corporates understands risk very well. Same time, so there is some kind of an education required there, so maybe then we will be much more transparent, and that 71% will then change. The second one is, within the organization itself, I've seen that we are not very data-driven. And one of the biggest ways today to mitigate risk is to be data-driven, to move away from a very reactive tool to make it more proactive. So there also we need to go back to the funder and say, listen, you can't get me to operate.
Can we get to the question, because we have only 10 minutes.
Yeah. So the question is, can we as practitioners be able to? How do you guys resonate to this fact that? Should we go back to the funders and try and tell them that please give us more money to build a very solid backend, to be more data-driven? Yeah. Do you think, all of us can sit and, sort of do this and then sort of reduce this whole fear of being a failure is not good?
Okay, thank you. So I request everyone to keep your questions short so we can get more feedback from the floor. So that'll be appreciated. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Pia, and I'm with Foundation for Mother and Child Health, and my question is specifically to Rishikesh, because you're kind of sitting on the other side of the table here. If somebody that you have supported comes to you and admits to failure of a program that you've been supporting for 3 years, you did talk about how it's within your culture as an organization, but you haven't been able to translate. What is your immediate reaction, and how do you kind of, because we saw the numbers, it says everybody's scared about losing funding. So what is your reaction usually?
Okay, so is there any more questions? Okay, there's one at that extreme end. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Suman from Reality Gives. My question is to all the panelists, and it's basically spinning off the idea of having a culture of change and culture of risk in the organization. And what I think a lot of people in the room would like to know, what are your house steps? Like, from your experience, could you share with us some tips or some steps that you can explicitly take to build a culture of change and risk in the organization? Thank you.
So just one more question, and then we'll ask the panel to respond.
I'm Renu Singh from Young Lives. Thank you for that really stimulating panel. Just one quick question. What does success mean for each of you? Because we've talked about what doesn't work, but I just want to understand what success means for each of you. And I heard Poonam mention cost-effective scalability. How does cost-effectiveness figure in the success story?
So,
yeah, so let me just address a combination of the questions that both of you asked. So I think, Arun, to your point, it's absolutely required, the CSR, collectivization and presentation. I was just thinking in this city we have a group called Mumbai Angels, which is actually a venture capital group of angel funders, and the word angel actually probably belongs to our sector more than the venture capital space, right? So I think it's required. I don't know who will play that role, right? I think that niche exists for someone to play a role, and we should have a chat about who will play that role. On the data part, I think we are just starting off to do pure MIS-only grants, where we have partners coming up from difficult areas, from the Northeast, or partners who are relying heavily on pen and paper-based systems. We're looking at programs where we say, here's a small little grant, go implement your MIS, I'll see you in 12 months, right? Just to encourage this data as a tool for decision-making piece. To the other question about what we would do, I think first it depends on the promise that was made. When we go back to our board, we say, this is the promise. If the promise was from someone who knew what they were doing, been doing it for 20 years, and there's a certain section of our work that is essentially boring work. Right? We know the partner, we know what they do, let's just support them. I would say that rightfully there should be a lower tolerance of failure in that space. But even if there is, I think the one question would be asked was that we should not lose sight of the value in itself in the work as well. For example, you might say an evaluation showed that we were working with adolescent girls and the rate of early marriage didn't go down in that, and that may be a failure, but we should not lose sight of the fact that thanks to your efforts or an organization like Magic Bus, those children did play sport for 2 hours a week, and they did go through those life skills trainings. And one mustn't lose sight of the value in itself as well, right? And as was earlier said about the Gates Foundation, I think the question would be similar, that what would you do different? I think those are some of the answers that we would share.
So let me start with the last question, and then I'll come to the question there. What did I mean by cost efficiency for sustainability? First of all, I believe, and as a donor I did it, and as an implementer I do it, it's very important to cost whether it's a pilot or the rollout at scale. We are at a stage, I believe, in India where we are a junkyard, or if you want to be more pessimistic, we are a graveyard of pilots. We've got enough pilots. We don't need pilots. And in every field, we have pilots. We have to think about scaling up what has worked and what hasn't worked. Or we have to design programs in a country like India. When people talk about helping 500 women or 50 women, it makes me very uncomfortable. And I'm learning from my own failures where I've done small pilots. We also have to see what isn't working. So if you're doing an intervention at scale, the costing is always lower. So when we rolled out Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hoon, I was very conscious that we have to work on scale, and we have to demonstrate that you can do this with reasonable, sustainable resources. Because there is X amount of money the government has, donors have. Actually, there's very little money for behavior change communication. So first, we had to acknowledge that much of what we have done We as PFI and other work that I have done and many of you have done has failed, the IEC that we've been doing. So we learned globally that entertainment education had worked and we costed it. So we have a costing of how much it costs for us to reach. We had planned to reach 100 million. So we had a costing and we reached 400 million. I don't even want to do the costing because it looks like a lie that it's only cost 10 paisa to reach per person. So that's what I was referring to. And costing is as important, I would like to say to the donors, as evaluation and monitoring. And that should be a key indicator. And most of the pilots have not got scaled up because they are very expensive. Especially, who are we talking about scaling up through government?
I'll have to hurry you up. I've been shown the time.
Okay, we're talking about scaling up through government, maybe Gates Foundation. The corporate sector hasn't shown too much appetite for scaling up. And quickly, 2 tips to you. And the first is that in the organization, at least where I work, we always identify the reason for failure, but don't target people, and we take collective responsibility to find solutions or change the course, whether it's going back to the donor as well as designing. And I would like to just end by saying one of the values where I work is acknowledging failure at a very early stage in small issues also. So when people acknowledge failure in the organization, it's the best monitoring successful strategy.
Thank you. So I can't remember all the questions, but I remember, so culture of change, I'll only say one word, because it's always the bottom of the pyramid to start on anything with change and risk is trust in your, building trust in your organization. And it's easily flouted around, but that's what you need to focus on. And then from that, you can build on so many elements of change, and you can create structures and processes, you can create innovation cells, you can cross-functional teams, all the different things you'll do. We're happy to share those. We've done quite a lot of that at Magic Bus, happy to share those with you. On the success, how do we, yeah, absolutely, how do we gauge success? You know, we talk about the failures. For me, it has to be about accountability to the vision and the mission of the organization. We are about alleviating poverty, and it's critical also to put qualitative in that as well. So we just have 3 metrics on our dashboards every month: how many children are in school, what are their grades, did they get married, and did they get a job when they left Magic Bus. So it's critical to keep tying yourselves into a measurable mechanism to measure that success. And Aaron, I completely agree with you. I think there needs to be a big push by the sector to create the conversation around some of the critical elements that you need to be successful that aren't about program. You know, about the A-team, you know, and the talent. You know, all of us are in organizations where we're trying to attract a talent which we just can't afford at the moment because people don't want to pay for that talent. We don't have automation. You know, we were operating 4,000 programs a day without automation because no one wanted. So absolutely, we need to accelerate that as an industry and say it's not acceptable to put us in this box and corner, and we need to create those platforms.
I'm going to take the question from there first. So what can we do to promote a culture of talking and learning from failures? I think the first thing is to really convey in the organization that failure is not necessarily the end of the world. It's not a bad thing. Easier said than done, but I think it's important that we create safe spaces. So in our annual review, we always have a session where we talk about what has not worked, and I am the first presenter during that session. And I think it's just, you know, some people feel a little sheepish. Ye nahi hua, but I think there are lessons learned, and we break into small groups where we say, how could we have done this better? So I think creating that safe space is important. I think programmatically, I've already spoken about how it's important to have very stringent monitoring frameworks which tells you something is not working so that you can immediately pivot. And the third and very important thing is to promote a culture of risk-taking. 4 years back, we wanted to keep apart a little bit of money. We are a poor NGO. We don't even have a corpus. But we have some savings, so we wanted to create funds, and the directions given to us was, okay, create a building fund and an asset fund. We wanted to create a risk-taking fund. But we know that the board wouldn't have approved if the word risk was there. So we called it the innovation fund and left it vague. And we have dipped into that innovation fund to try a bit of digital literacy, try to develop an app to recruit girls into our program. So I think it's really important to put your money where your mouth is. And the question about success, I don't want to sound flippant. And the first question to how are we different from for-profits? I think success for for-profits would be, getting majority of the market, more money, more investors, more shareholders, etc. But ultimate epic success for most of us in the room, whether it's C3 or Dasra, would be the day when we don't have our jobs anymore. Because ultimately, we should be working towards not having to do this kind of work. So I think when our mission, when our aim is so different from a for-profit, we really need to look at what is similar, what could some of the principles that could work in our sector, and how are we different and how could we deal with that.
So I think that's an amazing note to end this panel on. And for myself, it's been an absolutely humbling experience to see these wonderful people be so vulnerable, share their stories, put themselves out in a way, call out stuff. So I really thank you for putting faith in this panel and the idea of this conversation. So Rishi, Poonam, Matthew, and Aparajita, and I'm sure you will also share this moment of deep gratitude to all of them. Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure hosting this panel. Yes, a big round of applause for them.